We often think of childhood as this really innocent, carefree time. But what if there's a hidden world sort
Mhm.
of operating beneath all that, especially when it comes to something as, well, fundamental as sex?
Mm.
What if the way we're taught about it isn't quite as natural as it seems, but maybe more like a carefully built system of control?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these big societal forces can shape our most personal experiences, often in ways we don't really grasp until we start digging.
And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're diving deep into a book that really throws a wrench in those conventional ideas. Good Sex Illustrated by Duvert. This
Mhm.
one's translated by Bruce Benderson.
Right, the original is French. This edition, the 2007 one, is what we're looking at.
Yep. And our source material for this deep dive, it's excerpts taken straight from the book itself.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, Duvert isn't just talking about sex here. He's really using it as a lens, a powerful one, to look at how power dynamics play out across the board in society.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this. Our mission today is to really get a handle on Duvert's core argument that sex education isn't simply about information. It's actually a tool.
The tool, yeah.
And according to him, it's a tool that plays this really significant role in shaping us within a societal structure that he argues is basically built on exploitation. We're hunting for those insights, those connections, and make you go, huh, okay, I never saw it quite like that.
Which raises a big question right away, doesn't it? When we talk about sex ed, are we genuinely empowering people? Or are there maybe more subtle things going on, less obvious agendas in how we learn about intimacy, our bodies?
Well, one of the first things that really jumped out, even before we get deep into Duvert's main arguments,
Yeah.
is a note from the translator, Bruce Benderson. He talks about the real challenges in translating the original French.
Yeah, it wasn't just finding equivalent words, was it?
Not at all. He highlights these specific French terms that have this kind of dual meaning. They relate to both economics, like money, and also to behavior, personal actions.
That's interesting in itself. It immediately suggests this deep link between those two worlds, the economic and the sexual, in Duvert's original thinking.
Exactly. He gives examples like détournement. In French, it can mean misusing money, like embezzlement, but it also means the corruption of a minor.
Wow, okay. That's heavy.
Right. And Benderson says he used misappropriation in English, but admits it doesn't quite catch that darker second layer. So the language itself seems loaded, connecting sex and economics.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the language inherently links those things, how does that shape how a society even perceives financial crime versus, say, child exploitation? Are they seen as related somehow?
Another one is aliener. It can mean selling off property,
Yeah.
disposing of it. But Duvert apparently uses it to describe how sex ed affects a young person's
That's
sexuality.
if it's being alienated, made foreign, separated from them.
That's the idea. It suggests that, for Duvert, sex ed isn't about owning your sexuality. It's more like a dispossession, handing it over to what society expects.
That's a really powerful and kind of disturbing way to frame it.
Then there's consummation. We think of it as consumption, buying stuff. But it also means consummation, like in marriage.
Ah, another double meaning.
Yeah, so Benderson had to use both English words sometimes just to try and get that connection across that's just there in the French. It really underlines Duvert's potential point that even our most intimate acts are tied up with the societal economic engine.
It's not just personal desire, then. It's about fulfilling roles in a system of exchange, almost.
And the last one he mentions is jouissance. Always a tricky one to translate. It means pleasure, orgasm, enjoyment.
The good stuff.
Right. But legally, avoir la jouissance means having the full legal use and enjoyment of property.
So even pleasure itself gets tied to ownership and legal rights.
It seems that way in the original. Like Duvert is saying, even something seemingly free, like pleasure, is framed within rules, like property. This whole web of economic and sexual ideas in the French seems absolutely crucial to understanding his critique.
Okay, right. So with that linguistic background, let's dig into the core argument about society. Duvert paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't he? Suggesting human communities often work by benefiting some people at the expense of others.
Yeah, the core takeaway seems to be this deeply cynical view. Society as inherently exploitative. Everyone sort of participating in this give and take of abuse just to get by.
He even says that living in society only gives ordinary folks a meager advantage. Instead of being wiped out by nature, you end up exploited by other people within the structure.
It's bleak, all right, but it sets up his main question. Who's exploiting whom? How? And, like, what's the end goal? He sees society as this constant, often brutal negotiation of power.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting. He argues that if abuse, in its various forms, becomes the main way to get ahead, to find any prosperity or even just basic enjoyment.
That everyone ends up doing it, right, using whatever little power they have.
Exactly. It suggests this kind of systemic corruption. The structure itself pushes people towards exploitation at all levels. It's almost like a survival strategy in a fundamentally unfair system.
Trying to claw back some advantage.
Yeah. And he digs into how people who are exploited at one level often turn around and exploit those they see as below them, servants, women, children, even animals, he mentions.
So these smaller acts of exploitation become a way to compensate.
Right. And by doing that, they actually end up supporting the whole power system, even wanting to become exploiters themselves eventually.
And the family. Duvert sees the family unit as playing a key role here. He calls it a human reservoir.
A place where the exploited can, like, vampirize resources and support?
Kind of. But more than that, he sees it as the basic reproductive cell of this whole exploitative order. It just keeps churning out new participants for the system.
Okay, so if society is this big, complex machine of exploitation, according to Duvert, how does it keep running? He argues it's not mainly through brute force anymore in our times.
The control methods are more subtle, more indirect.
That's his argument. He shifts the focus from, obvious oppression to these less visible mechanisms.
Like what? What kind of mechanisms?
He talks about this pervasive network of generalized conditioning. It constantly teaches us what counts as useful social behavior.
Like what desires are okay, what desires are allowed.
Exactly. And what investments of our time and energy are seen as fruitful within this big order of expenditure, as he calls it. Think of it like society's unwritten rules, what's valuable, what to aim for, how to spend your resources, material and emotional, to fit in.
Like we're being programmed from day one to just fit into the machine.
And what's really unsettling is his description of the people within this system, someone who seems to have it all: job, family, the whole package.
To the normal, successful life.
Right. Duvert argues they can be a victim of the order, an active accomplice in keeping it going, and maybe even a minor beneficiary, all at the same time.
Through what he calls self-misappropriation.
Yeah, that idea that we internalize the system's values and apply them to ourselves. We become complicit in our own exploitation by chasing the rewards the system offers.
Wow. So we're all kind of caught in this web of complicity.
And this conditioning, he says, is constantly reinforced. Propaganda in all forms, direct and indirect. The state, other institutions. They're always pushing norms, codes, values that keep this system of, well, he calls it slavery, running.
And the hook is desire itself.
That's the key. Ideology isn't just abstract ideas, it's packaged in things we're made to want. He sees private property as the ultimate parody of pleasure.
Something we're taught will make us happy, even though the system allowing it is built on exploitation.
Precisely. So we get stuck in this cycle. Wanting, consuming. The exploited consumer tries to compensate by just going along with the very order that keeps them down, living in this sort of unreality, not seeing the implications, not knowing their real desires.
And the only reality is external, held by those in power.
That's his stark point. So even if people try to resist, the system is so ingrained that most people uphold it not out of malice, but just because they're completely adapted, like sardines to their can, is his phrase.
Okay, so with that rather grim picture of society and control set up, Duvert then turns his focus squarely onto sexology, the study of sex.
And yeah, it's fair to say he's not impressed.
No kidding. It's interesting how strongly he rejects this idea of costless orgasms and critiques how traditional sexology tends to categorize and ultimately judge sexual expression.
He argues it breaks down the whole spectrum of sexuality into these neat little boxes and then inevitably ranks them: inferior, superior.
Which then justifies this sort of medicalized theory of psychosomatic development.
Exactly, a prescribed path. Love, marriage, kids, the socially approved package.
And he's especially critical of how this framework labels childhood sexuality as lowly and immature.
Yeah, setting it up as the opposite of the supposedly ossified monosexuality of the normal adult, as if anything outside that narrow adult model needs to be outgrown or stamped out.
It's like it's automatically seen as wrong.
He calls this hierarchy the pyramid of phenomena, and he says it's just a list of winners, the sexual expressions approved by society, given a certificate of civic-mindedness or health.
And everything else. Anything that deviates from that procreative, civic-minded path.
It's seen as monstrous, unproductive, something this society of exploitation wants to ignore or eliminate.
It's a really sharp critique, isn't it? Suggesting sexology isn't neutral science, but actually helps reinforce social norms and biases about good and bad sex, serving the exploitative order, ultimately.
Which leads us right to his main target, sex education itself. Given his views on society and sexology, it's probably no shock he sees sex ed as way more complex and potentially insidious than just giving kids information.
Right. He sees it as a primary tool for control, specifically aimed at suppressing genuine desire.
That's the core argument. He says that from a young age, kids are deliberately kept from real social autonomy, from forming spontaneous relationships with peers.
Instead, they become observers, voyeurs of parental erotism, he calls it.
Yes. And the message they get constantly is that desire's ultimate purpose is procreation. And their own prepubescent bodies are basically impotent.
Lacking the operational organs needed for real adult sex, which means heterosexual intercourse for making babies.
Precisely. So their natural urges get carefully guided, socialized into this specific box. He uses the term adipolized, like their desires are forced into this Freudian family drama, both wanted and forbidden.
Pushed into this closed system where desire is harnessed, but also prohibited.
And their minds are trained to redirect that energy into aggression, power-seeking, owning things. It's a powerful, cynical take on how we socialize kids' sexuality. Far from freedom and exploration, it's about channeling desires into socially acceptable and exploitable paths.
And to really hammer this home, he includes this section called The Plain and Simple Story of the Average French Person. It seems innocent, like a kid's story about visiting a pregnant aunt.
Right, but it's totally satirical. He uses this conventional, idealized family setting to subtly critique the messages about sex and reproduction being passed down.
You've got the twins, Sophie and Thierry, age 7, happy pregnant Aunt Nicole, parents watching soccer. Seems normal.
Wholesome, yeah.
Then the kids get curious about the baby, and Dad decides it's time for the talk. And Duvert's presentation of this talk is key. It's incredibly simplistic, almost mechanical.
How babies are made by daddy and mommy using their sex organs, which, crucially, the kids can't see.
He outlines the basic biology. Man has penis, testicle, sperm. Woman has vagina, ovaries, ova. Then, bang, sperm meets ovum, baby forms.
Like an industrial production plan? Devoid of emotion connection beyond just making a baby?
Exactly. Notice the functional language. All mechanics, very little intimacy or real connection shown, just the procreative imperative.
Then there's the delivery of the product part, Aunt Nicole practicing for birth, being in shape, breathing quietly.
Then the baby just comes out, mom sleeps nearby, and the instructions for use for the baby, they're revealing.
How the baby needs constant care, but the payoff is the parents feel closer and love each other more.
Yeah, that subtle message. The child's existence reinforces the parental bond.
The potty culture section follows that theme. Obey mom to please her. Learning to walk gets praise, but the baby's only truly happy in mom and dad's arms. Reinforcing dependence.
Which leads to the ironically named A Sinless Paradise illustration. Happy naked kids on a beach.
Asking the same question, how are babies made? And getting the same basic biological answer.
It's that idealized childhood innocence right next to the control systems and the procreation focus that Duvert is critiquing.
Then the narrative jumps ahead. Puberty, the kids get their real adult bodies. Sophie admires her breasts, wants to be like mom. Thierry notices body hair, voice changing, wants to look athletic.
But the crucial line follows. But I won't misuse it.
Ah, that immediate clampdown. Control, restraint over their new sexuality. They have these real bodies, but they're clearly not supposed to do anything with them yet. Certainly not outside the approved path.
Then it jumps again. They're 18 or 20, maybe starting careers, degrees. And the focus shifts entirely to heterosexual pairing for acceptable activities.
Chaste walks, movies, lending books politely. Very proper, controlled, no hint of actual sexual exploration outside the procreative context.
Duvert even analyzes the family photos in this story. Smiling families, traditional gender roles.
The pregnant mom in the private hospital, designer luggage, choosing baby names. It paints this very specific picture of idealized middle-class bourgeois family life, all centered on having kids.
Notice the emphasis again on production and delivery. The baby as a promised gift, and it's a boy, significantly. Even the nursing mother is compared to a dishwashing liquid ad.
Linking domesticity, procreation, and consumerism.
And Duvert spells out what he thinks the child learns from all this. They learn what dad needs to be. wage earner, baby maker. That's how he keeps authority over wife and kids.
And this narrative invalidates the child's own body and urges, tells them to hide their sexuality until adulthood and heterosexual pairing for babies.
Exactly. He connects it back to the kid's innocent question, where do you buy babies? Sex ed reframes that into manufacturing babies at home, hiding the broader economic and social realities.
And he wraps up this section saying this constructed middle-class Eden is inevitably shattered by the storm of puberty. And the real enemy of this whole exploitative order, genuine, untamed desire, has to be controlled.
Which sets the stage perfectly for his harsher critique of formal sex ed materials, like that encyclopedia.
Right, which brings us to the next section. To live happily, live castrated, critique of encyclopedia. Here he targets a specific Hachette encyclopedia volume for 10 to 13-year-olds.
And he does not hold back, calls it the most oppressive document on the current sorry state of adult sexuality. That's strong.
Quite a statement. He compares it unfavorably to smug, elephantine, and God-fearing psychotherapy, accusing it of sacrificing kids' natural sexuality to Freud and family indoctrination.
He even quotes the intro for parents, which claims kids this age have apparently lost interest in bodies and reproduction, like their curiosity just vanished.
Which Duvert totally refutes. He argues desire isn't repressed then, it's actually getting more focused, often directed outside parental rules, leading to secret explorations among kids.
So the encyclopedia's call for parent-child dialogue on these topics. Duvert sees it as fake.
Worse, as an insidious effort to reconsolidate repressive adjustments, trying to pull kids back in line just as they start pushing back.
He contrasts the encyclopedia's focus, the heterosexual breeding couple, the baby, with the total lack of child or adult eroticism for its own sake.
It's all about the idealized family unit as the only source of harmony, protection, pleasure.
And he points out how the biggest photos often have the least information, acting as counterbalances to any potentially subversive text.
Yeah, using these big, empty images to exploit the child's need for affection, reinforcing the message, family equals pleasure, unequivocally.
Duvert sees this as selling kids a future, a perfect home, a better self than their parents, all based on middle-class dreams. A way to gloss over the present by promising a better future, like saying, pigs will fly.
He argues that while the encyclopedia talks about sex, the real issue, sexuality in its broader sense, is always present but inverted. It fails to explain the lies, blackmail, repressions kids face.
Instead, it just hammers home the heterosexual couple and nuclear family is the only way, not as specific historical constructs.
Exactly. And procreation is presented as the main, maybe only legitimate purpose of sex, not just one possibility, or even, as adults know, sometimes an accident.
He then dissects specific dialogues, like the one about erections. He notes how kids' everyday words are dismissed as slang.
While sterile, medical language is used to sanitize sex for middle-class talk. He argues real initiation can't happen in the family using this language because the family is often the primary repressor. This kind of sex ed actually prevents real understanding.
Then there's the dialogue on desire, comparing it to wanting cake. He sees the parents desperately linking desire to love and procreation while dodging questions about animal sex.
Duvert calls this a deliberate attempt at perfect mental castration, fostering ignorance, shame, confusion about the body, making the penis seem out of order.
He counters strongly, saying prepubescent erections aren't always involuntary, and kids do have real desires that are ignored or denied.
And he criticizes even liberal doctors who might mention erections or contraception, but still push a narrow morality pleasure reserved for adults in procreative marriage.
The tactic, Duvert says, is shifting goalposts. First, kids aren't physically mature, then later they're not psychically mature, just delaying tactics to maintain control.
And using idealized family stories to forge this false link between family and sexuality, defining sex only as making babies. Parents even get a premium on pleasure after they've done their duty.
Duvert sees this infantilization in sex ed materials as crucial. It creates a fake model of childhood innocence that supports scientific authority and parental approval,
leading real kids to feel abnormal, ashamed, stifling their own desires.
He then picks apart the description of intercourse, calls it a Puritan protocol for coitus. All focus on male ejaculation, female orgasm is silent, behind the scenes.
Portraying coitus as a functional, instinctual machine, erasing exploration, mutual pleasure, intimacy.
The discussion of contraception is also flawed, he argues. The pill is mentioned, but the kid's concern about the Pope highlights the pro-birth agenda.
Contraception isn't for individual freedom, but for married couples whose families are becoming too large. reinforcing sex for reproduction within marriage.
He critiques the societal pressure to have kids as a remedy for unhappiness and the devaluation of childless women. Notes the silence on clitoral masturbation, while pregnancy's pleasures are romanticized.
He analyzes the idealized pregnancy of Juliet. Perfect mother-fetus love, the baby is always a boy, highlights the infantilization of the female character Sylvie, reinforcing gender hierarchy.
Even female masturbation is marginalized. Not dangerous, maybe, but discouraged as hindering future true love. Sylvie connects it to not writing on doors, seeing the arbitrary prohibition.
Duvert reads the father's message as, stay close, work, wait for a future reward, which includes a regulated allowance for masturbation later, after fulfilling duties.
The encyclopedia frames solitary pleasure as arising from feeling abandoned, a strange remedy, perpetuating isolation and shame. Duvert argues prohibiting child masturbation is about privatizing the body for the future adult sexual marketplace.
He talks about the damaging duty to be sexual, not sexual, imposed on kids by these contradictions, resolved by oscillating based on external pressure until puberty makes genitals the sole recognized site of sexuality. The encyclopedia focuses on prohibiting masturbation, premature self-exploitation, and seduction by strangers, premature sexual commerce outside family control.
The father's reasoning liking masturbation makes loving someone else harder. Later, Duvert sees as prioritizing marriage above all.
Jean's simple question, is masturbation dangerous, reveals the unspoken prohibition within the family's supposed freedom.
The encyclopedia admits to sexual destitution in predolescence, but calls it an illusion or disease, pathologizing a lack of forced activity. Duvert says suppressing sexual experience leads to exploring social interactions often marked by contempt from unmet needs.
Schoolwork loses meaning when immediate sexual needs are frustrated. The encyclopedia implies any feelings of unease are the reader's fault. The solution is surrender to family and school.
The underlying message: get economic value first, worth something on the work market, before you can even play in the adult sexual market.
Duvert sees two threats to this childhood castration: contact with peers and interaction with strangers.
Though he notes young people often share pleasures more readily than adults, despite prohibitions.
He concludes the encyclopedia aims to create compliant future victims and disconcert bourgeois children inheriting wealth, ensuring they stick to the status quo.
He's surprised by the rabid opposition to minor eroticism, especially since it often mirrors adult sexual power dynamics.
He contrasts the encyclopedia's focus on ovaries with the reality of kids' games involving shared erotic activities, completely ignored in the official story. Points out the missing anus. What about its potential for shared pleasure?
The big guy from 8th grade scenario highlights instinctive same-sex encounters, contradicting the encyclopedia's rules on erections, leading to feelings of being woken up, not peaceful.
The question of contraception comes up even here, highlighting its potential use outside the prescribed context.
Duvert notes the disconcerting similarity in descriptions of sensation between pregnancy and anal sex again, ignored by the encyclopedia.
He discusses the fear of promiscuity, the scrambling of the good code outside the family.
Observes segregation among kids mirroring adult divisions, parents controlling friendships, leisure time to prevent unsupervised interaction.
The encyclopedia paints the outside world as dangerous, needing family surveillance, fostering fear of bad companions and unknown adults.
The dialogue on exhibitionists and sadists shows the father downplaying the former, exaggerating the latter to instill fear of strangers while avoiding the topic of pederasts. Duvert says this liberal discourse needs to justify prohibitions, risking revealing censored info. The pedophile is the father's rival, threatening family indoctrination.
The truth. Sadists are rare, exhibitionists often harmless. Father admits this. This contrasts with the fear-mongering. Duvert discusses pederasts seeking consensual minors, needing to be extremely nice to overcome kids' fear of strangers. The odious pederasty collaborates with the order by exploiting the child object's status in the family.
He distinguishes the father's control, iron fist or velvet glove, from the pederast educator's direct touch. Analyzes the naked father-son scene, father's penis canceled in the asexual family context, making a stranger's exposed fly a crime. Kids learn not to be deprivatized except asexually within the family.
The most docile kids, like Jean, are vulnerable to men resembling dad but appearing kinder. Runaways find refuges, potential alternative parents. It's a sexual rivalry, parents versus pederasts as survival options.
Wealthy, order-respecting pederasts thrive, but poor, dissident, young pedophiles engaging in communication based on reciprocal desire challenge family norms.
Parental warnings. Everyone wants to kill you. Versus Duvert's view. Real danger in cars is accidents. Sexual pseudo-misdeeds condemned while industrial cruelty is legal. Parents prioritize exclusive rights over child's well-being.
Battered children internalizing guilt rehabilitates parents. Duvert claims the worthy conforming child and the persecuted child experience the same dynamics. Parental power, libidinal investment, child robbed of life.
Intense parental investment leads to excessive normalization, eliminating the child's true being. Control shifts from violence to institutional methods as kids age, relying on their ability to play the game. Hypothesis. Suicide replaces parental murder later, a hidden familial secret of abuse.
Common points in child-adolescent mortality. Vague circumstances, parental secrecy, no socioeconomic correlation, external rules align with family repression.
Satirical prediction. Science claims swear words cause paranoia. Asylum. Pleasure reserved for rich, others punished. Indispensable sentiment, love, affection, used to justify prohibiting pleasure.
Duvert's conclusion. Private ownership of children is society's psychosexual compensation for adult submission to exploitation and pleasure prohibition. Sex ed reinforces this, emphasizes baby reward, binds kids to obedience to chastity, holds out the sinister verb of having their own kids.
The outcome, antisocial, rigid, frustrated adults obsessed with privatization and power. Contrast French repression with Danish liberalization, sexual majority 14, but argues Danish reform while relieving suffering doesn't change the exploitative order. Kids remain family-centric, trained in commerce before sexual freedom.
Societal reforms seen as rewards from a good exploiting state, removing superfluous constraints. Conservative countries envy nations with the modern and functional order, ensuring exploitation survival.
References statistics. Simon report on masturbation, higher guilt in France as appears to dip in women. Similarly, pleasure capacity in pubescent, prepubescent kids. Difference is expression socialization.
Footnotes mention news articles. Dr. Hacker on aggression violence. Torture's normality. Dr. Haim on adolescent suicide attempts. Hard to get figures. Hachette Encyclopedia for older teens, 1416. Le Monde article citations.
More Simon report stats. Coitus with third person, low for women. Sex frequency, methods, masturbation together, oral, anal. Partners, men report more. Homosexual relations, lower reported in France, more refusals to answer. Satisfaction with foreplay duration, men more dissatisfied. American research on flaccid erect penis size. Benderson's intro highlights Duvert's significance, obscurity in English areas. It's a deeply critical, unsettling perspective on how society shapes sex from childhood.
So yeah, to kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've really seen how Duvert, in Good Sex Illustrated, offers this incredibly critical, really challenging view of sex education. He's arguing it's not just neutral info.
No, not at all.
It's fundamentally about social control.
Yeah.
Actively reinforcing a system where economic and sexual exploitation are just deeply intertwined.
And he just relentlessly pushes that core idea, doesn't he? That genuine autonomous desire gets systematically suppressed, redirected, all in favor of this pro-birth, family-first social order.
An order that ultimately served the needs, the power structures of the exploitative society he describes.
Exactly.
The book definitely offers some surprising, maybe even, deeply uncomfortable perspectives. Thinking about family dynamics as a kind of psychological castration, challenging those rosy ideas about childhood innocence.
It really makes you pause and think about the assumptions embedded in all the messages we get about sex, relationships, what's normal or healthy, whose interests are really being served.
Right. So for our final thought for you, the listener, maybe consider this. How do the messages about sex and relationships you've encountered in school, from family, media, wherever, how do they stack up against Duvert's critical view in Good Sex Illustrated?
Do they align? Do they clash?
Yeah, what assumptions are being made in those messages you received? And ultimately, whose interests might they be serving, maybe without you even realizing it?
It's certainly a book that pushes you to question the norms, the narratives about sex and childhood we often just accept without thinking.
We definitely encourage you to seek out Good Sex Illustrated if you can and explore these provocative ideas more for yourself. And thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today.